The cold wind of the high plains swept over the abandoned cattle station like a phantom, as Katherine Blackwell crouched behind the weathered remains of a collapsed fence, blood trickling from a gash on her arm as the largest gray wolf she'd ever seen prowled less than 20 yards away. Behind her, huddled in the shell of an old wagon, her 4-year-old son Daniel whimpered softly, his small hands clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd made him for his last birthday. 3 days on the run from Topeka with nothing but a knife, her father's old revolver, and whatever supplies she could carry had brought her to this desperate moment in the Kansas wilderness, 1875. The wolf's amber eyes locked with hers, calculating and hungry. 2 of its pack mates circled to the left, looking for an opening. Katherine tightened her grip on the revolver, knowing she had only 2 bullets left. Her throat was dry as dust as she realized with terrible clarity that she couldn't protect both herself and Daniel from 3 wolves with just 2 shots. "Stay in the wagon, Danny," she whispered, never taking her eyes off the predators. "Don't make a sound. Mama's going to make these bad wolves go away." The lead wolf lowered its head, muscles bunching beneath its thick gray coat. Katherine knew what was coming. She braced herself, raising the revolver. This would be the moment that determined whether she and Daniel lived to see another sunrise. The wolf launched forward in a powerful leap just as a rifle shot cracked across the open plain, startling birds into flight from a distant copse of trees. The wolf yelped and tumbled in midair, hitting the ground with a heavy thud as its companions scattered into the tall grass. "Get down." A man's voice commanded. Katherine ducked instinctively, sheltering her head as 2 more shots rang out in quick succession. When she dared to look up, she saw a figure on horseback galloping toward them, rifle held high with one hand while the other expertly controlled a powerful chestnut stallion. As the rider approached, Katherine could see he was a tall man, broad-shouldered with a weathered face partially hidden beneath the brim of a dusty brown hat. His beard was flecked with silver, but his movements as he dismounted were those of a man in his prime, fluid and purposeful. He scanned the area with alert blue eyes before turning his attention to her. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "Grady Blackburn, those wolves have been troubling my herds for weeks." His gaze shifted to her bleeding arm, then to the wagon where Daniel's small face peeked out. "Appears they found themselves more than they bargained for in you." Katherine lowered her revolver, her heart still hammering against her ribs. "Katherine Blackwell, and my son Daniel." She swallowed hard, suddenly lightheaded from the combination of fear, relief, and days of too little food. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn." Another moment, and I don't think I would have, her voice faltered as the world tilted sideways. The last thing she remembered was Grady Blackburn moving with surprising speed to catch her before she hit the ground. Katherine awoke to the aroma of coffee and the crackling of a fire. For a moment she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling above her was made of rough-hewn logs, and she lay on a simple but comfortable bed covered with a patchwork quilt. She bolted upright, panic seizing her. "Daniel." She called out. "Your boy's fine, madam," came a deep voice from across the room. "He's out in the yard with my son, Jacob." Grady Blackburn stood in the doorway of what she now recognized as a modest cabin. He held a steaming mug in his hands, and his expression was guarded but not unkind. "I dressed that cut on your arm," he continued. "Not deep enough to need stitches, but you'll want to keep it clean." He crossed the room and set the mug on a small table beside the bed. "Coffee. Figured you might need it." Katherine touched her arm, noting the clean bandage wrapped around it. "How long have I been asleep?" "About 6 hours. Sun's starting to set." Grady nodded toward the window, where indeed the light had taken on the golden quality of late afternoon. "Mind if I ask what brings a woman and a young boy out to this part of Kansas alone?" "Nearest town is Dodge City, and that's a good 15 miles southwest of here." Katherine sipped the coffee, buying herself time to think. The warm liquid revived her senses, making her realize how hungry she was, but caution warned her against revealing too much. We're traveling to see family in Colorado, she said finally, avoiding his gaze. We lost our way. Grady's expression made it clear he didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. Well, you're welcome to rest here until you're strong enough to continue your journey. My ranch is just over that ridge. He gestured vaguely to the west. This is an old line cabin I keep stocked for when I'm checking the far pastures. A child's laughter drifted through the open window, and Catherine's heart clenched with relief at the sound. She moved to stand, but Grady held up a hand. Give yourself a minute, he advised. You've been through quite an ordeal from the looks of it. Katherine ignored his suggestion, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Her boots had been removed, she noticed, but she was otherwise fully clothed. I need to see my son, Grady nodded, stepping back to give her space. Of course. She wobbled slightly as she stood, and he reached out to steady her, his grip firm but gentle on her elbow. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled away more abruptly than she intended. I'm sorry, she said. I'm just… No need to explain, Grady replied, dropping his hand. Caution's a virtue out here. He led her outside where Daniel was playing with a boy who appeared to be around 10 or 11 years old. The older boy was showing Daniel how to throw a lasso, using a small stump as a target. When Daniel saw his mother, he dropped the rope and ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. Mama. Jacob showed me his horse, and Mr. Blackburn said I could have biscuits with honey, and there's chickens over there. The words tumbled out in excitement, his earlier fear apparently forgotten. Katherine knelt, embracing him tightly. That sounds wonderful, sweetie. She examined his face, reassured by his bright eyes and rosy cheeks. Have you been good for Mr. Blackburn? Daniel nodded solemnly. Yes, madam, and Jacob is teaching me to be a real cowboy. The older boy approached, respectfully removing his smaller version of his father's hat. Hello, Mrs. Blackwell, I'm Jacob Blackburn. His manners were impeccable, and he had his father's same striking blue eyes. Thank you for entertaining my son, Jacob, Katherine said with a genuine smile. It's nice to meet you. Grady came to stand beside his son, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder with obvious pride. Jacob's been my right hand since his mother passed 3 years ago. Don't know what I'd do without him. Katherine caught the flicker of grief that passed between father and son, a silent understanding that spoke of a wound still healing. I'm sorry for your loss, she said softly. Grady's expression shifted, becoming more guarded again. Appreciate that. Typhoid took her and our youngest. Hard times, he cleared his throat. Jacob, why don't you show Daniel where we keep the chicken feed? You two can gather the eggs for supper. As the boys ran off toward a small coop on the far side of the yard, Grady turned back to Katherine. Mrs. Blackwell, I don't mean to pry into your business, but there's something you should know. There was a wanted poster in Dodge City last time I was there. Man named Theodore Blackwell, wanted for embezzlement from the Kansas Pacific Railroad. Poster mentioned he might be traveling with his daughter and grandson. Katherine's blood ran cold. She took a step back, her eyes darting to where Daniel was laughing with Jacob. I don't much care what your connection to Theodore Blackwell is, Grady interrupted, keeping his voice low. But there are men looking for him, and they didn't strike me as the type to ask polite questions first. Katherine fought to keep her expression neutral, though her mind was racing. Why are you telling me this? Grady studied her face. Because whatever your troubles are, I don't believe they involve you being a criminal. And that boy needs his mother. For a moment, Katherine considered continuing the pretense, but something in Grady's direct gaze made her reconsider. My father stole that money to pay for medical care for my mother, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She died anyway. When the railroad investigators came, he panicked. He grabbed whatever cash was left and we ran. Where is he now? Katherine looked away. Dead, 2 days ago. His heart gave out just outside of Larned. I buried him under a cottonwood and kept moving. Her voice broke. Daniel doesn't know yet. I haven't found the words to tell him his grandfather isn't coming back. Grady's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. Losing a parent isn't easy, no matter the circumstances. A tear slid down Catherine's cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly. The money's gone, spent on doctors and medicine, but I doubt that will matter to the men looking for him. They'll want someone to punish. You're right about that, Grady agreed grimly. The Kansas Pacific doesn't take kindly to those who cross them. We need to leave, Katherine said, anxiety tightening her chest. We've imposed on your kindness too long already. Grady shook his head. Nightfall's coming and there's a storm brewing to the north. You'll stay here tonight at least. Tomorrow we can talk about where you might go next. Katherine wanted to argue, but exhaustion and practicality won out. She nodded reluctantly. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Grady, he corrected. If we're harboring fugitives together, we might as well use first names, Katherine. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at her lips. I'm not a fugitive. Maybe not in the eyes of the law, Grady said, but the Kansas Pacific has its own ideas about justice. And out here, their reach is long. The simple supper of beans, biscuits, and fresh eggs was the most delicious meal Katherine had tasted in weeks. Daniel ate until his small belly protruded, then fell asleep beside Jacob on a buffalo hide rug near the fireplace, the older boy having exhausted himself entertaining his young guest. Katherine helped Grady clean up, washing the tin plates in a basin while he stoked the fire. The domestic scene felt strange after so many days of fear and running. How did you end up out here? She asked, curious about this solitary man and his son. Grady settled into a chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. Came west after the war. Fought for the Union, couldn't go back to Kentucky after. Too many ghosts. He spoke matter-of-factly without self-pity. Worked cattle drives for years, saved enough to buy this place 8 years ago, got married, started building something. It's a beautiful piece of land, Katherine said. What you've glimpsed of it anyway, Grady replied with a hint of amusement. 5,000 acres, most of it good grazing, creek running through that never goes dry, even in the worst droughts. It's a fine place to raise cattle, he paused. And a boy. Katherine glanced at the sleeping children. Jacob seems like a wonderful son. He is smart as a whip too, reading books most grown men wouldn't understand. Pride colored his voice. His mother wanted him to go east for schooling eventually, Harvard or Yale. A shadow passed over his features. I'm trying to honor that wish, but it's hard to imagine sending him away. You'd miss him terribly, Katherine said, understanding the conflict. Grady nodded, his gaze on the fire. What about you? Before all this trouble, what kind of life did you have? Katherine dried her hands on a rough towel, considering how much to share. I was a teacher in Topeka, very ordinary life. My husband died of pneumonia when Daniel was just a baby. I moved back in with my parents to make ends meet. Teaching's a noble profession, Grady remarked. Do you miss it? Every day, Katherine admitted. There's something special about watching a child learn to read, seeing that moment when the letters become words and the words have meaning. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the children. Katherine found herself studying Grady's profile, the strong line of his jaw beneath his beard, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor indicated. You should get some rest, he said finally, catching her gaze. You can take the bed. Jacob and I will bunk out here by the fire. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Grady insisted gently. You're still recovering and tomorrow might bring its own challenges. Katherine wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. Thank you for everything. As she carried a sleeping Daniel to the small bedroom, she felt Grady's eyes on her back. For the first time in days, she didn't feel the need to look over her shoulder in fear. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight they were safe. Morning dawned clear and cool, the threatened storm having passed to the east during the night. Katherine woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and the low murmur of masculine voices. She dressed quickly, smoothing her hair as best she could without a proper mirror. Daniel was already at the table when she emerged from the bedroom, his face sticky with what appeared to be molasses. Jacob sat beside him, patiently showing him how to use a knife to cut his bacon into manageable pieces. "Good morning," Grady said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Hope we didn't wake you." "Not at all," Katherine assured him, accepting the cup gratefully. "I haven't slept that well in weeks." Grady nodded toward her arm. "Let me check that cut after breakfast, make sure it's healing clean." The domesticity of the scene struck Katherine again, bringing a lump to her throat. This was the kind of ordinary morning she'd longed for during their desperate flight. Simple food, kind voices, the absence of immediate danger. After they'd eaten, Jacob took Daniel outside to collect more eggs, promising to show him how the new foal was doing. Grady carefully unwrapped the bandage on Katherine's arm, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "Looks good," he pronounced, applying a fresh layer of a pungent salve before rewrapping it. "No signs of infection. You seem well practiced at this," Katherine observed. "Ranching teaches you to be your own doctor," Grady replied, securing the bandage. "Can't always ride into town for every cut and bruise." Their eyes met as he finished, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was a tension in the air between them, an awareness that Katherine hadn't felt in a very long time. Grady broke the silence first, stepping back and clearing his throat. "I've been thinking about your situation. The men looking for your father won't give up easily, especially if there's a reward involved." Katherine's momentary ease evaporated. "What do you suggest? I know a man in Colorado, George Wilkes, owns a cattle operation near Denver. Good man, fair. Needs a teacher for his grandchildren and the children of his ranch hands." Grady hesitated. "I could write to him, ask if he'd consider taking you on. It would be a fresh start, far from Kansas Pacific territory." Hope blossomed in Katherine's chest, tempered immediately by practical concerns. "How would we get there? I have very little money left, and traveling alone has proven more dangerous than I anticipated." Grady seemed to wrestle with a thought before continuing. "There's a cattle drive leaving for Denver in 2 weeks. I'm sending 300 head with my foreman and some of the hands. You and Daniel could travel with the chuck wagon. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would be safe." "Why would you do this for us?" Katherine asked, searching his face. "You barely know me." Grady's expression was difficult to read. "Maybe I recognize something in you, determination, courage, the will to protect what's yours no matter the cost." He shrugged, as if embarrassed by his own words. "Or maybe I just don't like seeing the railroad bullies win." Katherine felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. 2 weeks, she repeated. "What would we do until then?" "Stay here," Grady said simply. "The line cabin's far enough from the main house that no one would notice you if riders came looking. I can bring supplies and Jacob could use the company." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Daniel too, from the looks of it. The offer was incredibly generous, almost too good to be true. Katherine's natural caution made her hesitate. "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," Grady interrupted. "It's the right thing to do." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Unless you have a better plan." Katherine thought of the long, dangerous road ahead, of Daniel's small legs tired from walking, of the wolves that had nearly ended their journey permanently. "No," she admitted, "I don't have a better plan." "Then it's settled," Grady said, as if they were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "You'll stay until the drive leaves for Denver." Before Katherine could respond, Jacob burst through the door, his young face alight with excitement. "Pa, riders coming. Looks like Mr. Hawkins and some men from town." Grady's expression darkened instantly. "How many?" "4, I think. They're still a ways off." Grady turned to Katherine, all business now. "Take Daniel and go to the root cellar. There's a trap door under the rug by the stove. Stay there until I come for you." Katherine's heart raced as she moved to obey, grabbing Daniel from where he stood in the doorway. "Who is Mr. Hawkins?" "Railroad agent," Grady said grimly, reaching for his rifle, "and not a patient man." The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Daniel clung to Katherine, sensing her fear though she tried to hide it. Above them, they could hear the muffled sounds of men's voices, then boots on the wooden floor as the visitors entered the cabin. "Sorry to disturb you, Blackburn," a voice said, carrying faintly through the floorboards. "Tracking some fugitives. Theodore Blackwell and his daughter, embezzlers, stole a small fortune from the Kansas Pacific." "Haven't seen any strangers," Grady's voice replied evenly. "Been busy with the spring calving. Mind if we look around? Railroad's offering a handsome reward." There was a pause, and Katherine held her breath, clutching Daniel closer. "My home is my own, Hawkins," Grady said, his tone hardening. "You want to search it, you'll need more than a railroad badge. Judge Mercer might have something to say about that." Another voice joined in, lower and more threatening. "We don't need a judge out here, Blackburn. We're just asking neighborly-like." "And I'm declining neighborly-like," Grady countered. "Now, I've got work to do. Unless you're here to buy cattle, I suggest you move along." The tension in the air was palpable even from their hiding place. Katherine pressed a hand over Daniel's mouth, fearful he might make a sound. After what seemed an eternity, the first voice spoke again. "We'll be watching the trails, Blackburn. These fugitives are dangerous, desperate types. Killed a man in Larned, we heard." "Appreciate the warning," Grady replied, his tone neutral. "I'll keep an eye out." More shuffling of boots, then the sound of horses moving away. Katherine counted to 100 before she dared to breathe normally again. A few minutes later, the trap door opened, revealing Grady's concerned face. "They're gone," he said, extending a hand to help her up, "but they'll be back." Katherine climbed out, lifting Daniel after her. "They said something about a killing in Larned. My father never hurt anyone. Men like Hawkins don't need truth," Grady said darkly, "just a story that serves their purpose." He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "We need to move you to the main house. The line cabin's too obvious a place to look if they come back." "But won't that put you in more danger?" Katherine protested. "If they find us there, they won't," Grady assured her. "The ranch house has places to hide that even Jacob doesn't know about." "Built it that way on purpose." A shadow crossed his face. "The war taught me to always have an escape route." Katherine studied him, seeing the lines of worry etched more deeply around his eyes. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Grady." His expression softened slightly. "Trouble finds its way without invitation, Katherine. Always has." He looked down at Daniel, who was watching the adults with solemn eyes. "Besides, I made a promise to help, and Blackburns keep their word." That afternoon, they moved to Grady's main ranch house, a surprisingly substantial two-story structure built of sturdy timber and local stone. Katherine learned that Grady had designed it himself, incorporating ideas from the grand homes he'd seen in Kentucky as a young man. "My wife thought I was crazy building something this size out here," he told her as he showed them to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor. "Said we'd never fill all the rooms." His voice caught slightly. "Guess she was right about that." Katherine touched his arm gently. "It's a beautiful home, Grady. She must have been very proud of it." He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. "Mary had a way of making any place feel like home, even a tent on the prairie during those first years." He cleared his throat. "Supper's at 6. Jacob will show you where everything is." As he turned to leave, Katherine called after him. "Grady, thank you for everything." He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the hallway light. "You're welcome, Katherine." Then he was gone, his boot steps fading down the corridor. Jacob proved to be an excellent tour guide, showing Katherine and Daniel around the ranch with obvious pride. The boy had his father's serious demeanor, but a natural warmth that put Katherine at ease. He seemed especially taken with Daniel, treating the younger boy with a big brotherly patience that touched Katherine's heart. "Pa says you're a teacher," Jacob remarked as they walked back toward the house after visiting the horse corral. "I was," Katherine confirmed. "Do you go to school, Jacob?" The boy shook his head. "No, madam. Pa teaches me reading and ciphering and history, and Mr. Gonzalez, he's our foreman, teaches me Spanish." He hesitated. "Pa says I need to learn a lot if I'm going to college someday." "Your father's right about that," Katherine said. "Education is very important," Jacob kicked at a stone, I guess, but sometimes I think I'd rather just stay here and learn to run the ranch with Pa. Katherine heard the conflict in his voice, so similar to what Grady had expressed. There's time to decide what you want, Jacob. You're still young. Pa says a man needs to have a plan, Jacob replied seriously. And what does your father plan for himself? Katherine asked, curious about the quiet rancher who had shown them such unexpected kindness. Jacob considered this. Don't rightly know, madam. Since Ma died, he just works. Doesn't talk much about the future except for me going to college. His young face clouded. Sometimes I think he's lonely, but he won't admit it. Katherine thought about this as they continued toward the house, Daniel's small hand in hers. Grady Blackburn was a hard-working rancher with the manners of a gentleman. A devoted father who kept his own feelings carefully guarded. A man who would risk himself to help strangers, yet seemed to keep the rest of the world at arm's length. Over the next few days, Katherine settled into a routine at the ranch. She insisted on making herself useful, helping with meals and taking over some of Jacob's lessons to give Grady more time for his work. Daniel thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, following Jacob everywhere and soaking up new experiences like a sponge. Grady remained somewhat reserved, but Katherine occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite define. During the evenings, after the boys were in bed, they would sometimes sit together on the porch, talking about books or current events or their childhoods. Katherine found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations, drawn to Grady's thoughtful perspective and dry humor. A week into their stay, a spring thunderstorm rolled across the plains, bringing torrential rain and spectacular lightning. Daniel was frightened by the thunder, so Katherine sat with him in the parlor, reading stories to distract him from the storm's fury. Grady entered, soaking wet from checking on the livestock. "Everything's secure," he announced, removing his dripping hat. "Though we might lose that old cottonwood by the creek if this wind keeps up." He moved to the fireplace, warming his hands. Katherine couldn't help noticing how his wet shirt clung to his broad shoulders, revealing the strong physique usually hidden beneath his loose work clothes. "Is Jacob asleep?" she asked, looking away quickly. "Reading in his room," Grady replied. "That boy would read through Judgment Day if the good Lord allowed it." He glanced at Daniel, who had finally dozed off in Katherine's lap. "Looks like the storm was too much for our young cowboy." Katherine smiled, stroking Daniel's hair. "He fought it as long as he could." Grady watched them for a moment, something softening in his expression. "He's a fine boy, Katherine. You've done well with him, especially considering the circumstances." "Thank you," she said, touched by the compliment. "I worry sometimes that I'm not enough for him, that he needs a father." "Children are resilient," Grady observed, sitting in the chair opposite her. "And they need love more than they need a perfect situation. You give him that in abundance." Katherine studied Grady's face in the firelight, seeing the genuine kindness behind his usually guarded expression. "You're a good father, Grady. Jacob adores you." A flash of vulnerability crossed his features before he looked away. "I try. Mary was the natural parent. I'm still learning. We all are," Katherine said softly. "Every day." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the solid walls of Grady's home, Katherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a very long time. As she looked at this man who had risked so much for her and Daniel, she realized with a jolt that her feelings for him were growing beyond simple gratitude. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. In less than a week, they would be leaving for Colorado. This temporary sanctuary wasn't meant to be permanent, and Grady had his own life, his own responsibilities. The last thing he needed was a woman with a complicated past and a young child to care for. As if sensing her thoughts, Grady spoke. "I sent a letter to George Wilkes yesterday. Should reach Denver before you do." "Thank you," Katherine said, pushing aside her conflicted emotions. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate everything you've done for us." Grady nodded, his eyes returning to the fire. "It's nothing you wouldn't have done yourself given the chance." They sat in companionable silence as the storm gradually subsided, each lost in thoughts they weren't ready to share. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the world washed clean by the night's rain. Katherine rose early, unable to sleep with her mind full of conflicting thoughts. She made her way to the kitchen, intending to start breakfast, but paused at the sight of Grady already there, kneading dough on the large wooden table. "You bake?" she asked, surprised. He glanced up, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. "Biscuits. Only thing I can make that doesn't involve just throwing meat in a pan." He continued kneading with practiced movements. "Jacob likes them with honey." "May I help?" Katherine offered, moving beside him. "Cut them out while I finish this batch," Grady suggested, nodding toward a tin cutter. They worked together in comfortable silence, their hands occasionally brushing as they transferred the biscuits to the baking sheet. Katherine was acutely aware of Grady's proximity, the clean scent of soap mixed with the earthier smells of leather and horses that seemed to cling to him. "Hawkins and his men were spotted in Dodge City yesterday," Grady said as he slid the biscuits into the oven. "My foreman heard they're offering double the reward now." Katherine's hands stilled on the rolling pin. "They're not going to stop, are they?" "Not until they find someone to punish," Grady confirmed grimly. "But by this time next week, you'll be well on your way to Denver, where the Kansas Pacific has less influence." "And if they follow us there?" Katherine asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake. Grady turned to face her, his expression serious. "George Wilkes has connections in Colorado that make even railroad men think twice. Once you're under his protection, Hawkins will find easier prey to chase." Katherine wanted to believe him, but doubt still gnawed at her. "I'm putting you and Jacob at risk by staying here. We've weathered worse," Grady assured her. "Besides, Jacob hasn't been this happy since," he broke off, looking away. "Since his mother died," Katherine finished softly. Grady nodded, busying himself with wiping down the table. "He misses having a family around him. I do my best, but—" "You're a wonderful father, Grady," Katherine said, touching his arm gently. "Jacob is lucky to have you." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his blue eyes, a warmth that made Katherine's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might even move closer, but the sound of footsteps on the stairs broke the spell. "Pa, is breakfast ready? I'm starving." Jacob called, bounding into the kitchen with Daniel close behind. The moment passed as Grady turned to greet the boys, but Katherine felt its echo resonating within her long after. That afternoon, as Katherine hung laundry in the yard, enjoying the spring sunshine, she noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. Her heart raced with sudden fear as she watched a group of riders approaching the ranch. "Grady," she called, gathering the wet clothes back into the basket. He emerged from the barn, following her gaze to the approaching riders. His face hardened as he recognized them. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Take Daniel and go to the hiding place I showed you. Jacob knows what to do." Katherine wanted to protest, to stay beside him, but the safety of their children had to come first. She hurried inside, finding Jacob already ushering Daniel toward a concealed door in the pantry that led to a small room between the walls. "Pa will handle it," Jacob assured her with a confidence that belied his years. "He always does." From their hiding place, they could hear muffled voices as Hawkins and his men confronted Grady in the yard. Though they couldn't make out the words, the tension was evident in the tone. Katherine held Daniel close, praying that Grady wouldn't pay too high a price for his kindness to them. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they heard Grady's signal, 3 short knocks followed by 2 longer ones. Jacob pushed open the hidden door and they emerged to find Grady waiting for them, his expression grim. "They're getting bolder," he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Hawkins claims they have the right to search any property in the county. What did you tell them?" Katherine asked, setting Daniel down but keeping him close. "That they were welcome to get a proper search warrant from Judge Mercer, but until then my land is my own." Grady's jaw tightened. They didn't like that answer. Jacob looked up at his father with concern. Are they coming back, Pa? Grady hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share in front of the children. Possibly, but we'll be ready if they do. He forced a reassuring smile. Now, who's hungry, those biscuits should be about cool enough to eat. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Katherine found Grady on the porch, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. The moon was nearly full, casting the yard in silver light and throwing his profile into sharp relief. You didn't tell me everything earlier, she said, sitting beside him on the bench, Grady's hands stilled on the rifle. No, he admitted, I didn't want to worry the boys. But you're worried, Katherine observed. He set the rifle aside, turning to face her. Hawkins isn't just a railroad agent. He's a hired gun who uses that badge to give his actions a veneer of legitimacy. Grady's expression was somber. He threatened to come back with more men tomorrow. Katherine felt cold despite the mild spring night. Then we should leave tonight. I won't have you facing danger because of us. And go where? Grady asked quietly. The cattle drive doesn't leave for another 3 days. You'd be vulnerable on the open road. We managed before, Katherine insisted, though even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. Barely, Grady reminded her. Katherine, I know men like Hawkins. If you run now, he'll never stop hunting you. Your best chance is to stay the course, join the drive as planned, and get to Denver where you'll have proper protection. And until then, what if he brings men tomorrow as threatened? Grady's mouth set in a determined line. Then they'll find that a cornered rancher is more than they bargained for. He reached out, covering her hand with his own. I won't let them hurt you or Daniel, I promise you that. The warmth of his hand on hers sent a flutter through Katherine's chest. Why, Grady? Why risk so much for us? He seemed to struggle with his answer, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally, but his tone suggested there was more he wasn't saying. Katherine found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. For a heartbeat, she thought he might close the distance between them, but instead he withdrew his hand and stood up. We should get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Tomorrow may be a long day. As she watched him disappear into the house, Katherine felt a curious mixture of disappointment and relief. Whatever was growing between them was complicated by circumstances neither of them had chosen. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward this quiet, honorable man who had risked everything to protect her and Daniel. The next morning, Grady rode out early to check on the cattle, leaving Jacob in charge of the house. The boy took his responsibility seriously, keeping watch from the upstairs window while Katherine tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Daniel's sake. By mid-morning, there was still no sign of Hawkins or his men, but Katherine's nerves remained on edge. She was hanging freshly washed curtains in the parlor when Jacob called down from his lookout position. Riders coming. But it's not Mr. Hawkins, it's Mr. Gonzalez and Pa. Katherine felt a surge of relief as she hurried to the window. Sure enough, Grady was returning with his foreman, a wiry Mexican man with an impressive mustache whom she'd met briefly earlier in the week. They were riding fast, which immediately set off alarm bells in Katherine's mind. She met them at the door as they dismounted. Grady's expression confirmed her fears before he even spoke. Hawkins has gathered at least a dozen men in town, he said without preamble. They're drinking heavily and making threats. Miguel heard them talking about coming out here at sunset. Miguel Gonzalez nodded grimly. They are not just railroad men, Senora. Some are known troublemakers, gunmen. Grady turned to Jacob, who had joined them on the porch. Son, I need you to help Mr. Gonzalez gather the ranch hands. We're moving up the cattle drive. It leaves today. Jacob's eyes widened. Today. But we're not ready. We'll have to make do, Grady interrupted. It's our best chance to get Mrs. Blackwell and Daniel safely away. Katherine looked between the two men, understanding dawning. You're sending us with the cattle now, before Hawkins returns, Grady nodded. Miguel will lead the drive. 20 men and 300 cattle make a formidable group even for Hawkins to challenge. Once you're a day's ride from here, he'll have to accept that you've slipped his net. What about you and Jacob? Katherine asked, her heart sinking at the thought of leaving them behind. We'll follow in a day or two once I've dealt with Hawkins, Grady replied. I have some business to finish in Dodge City anyway. Katherine shook her head, a sudden determination filling her. No. I won't leave you to face those men alone because of me. Miguel cleared his throat discreetly. Senor Blackburn, perhaps I could suggest— Not now, Miguel, Grady said, his attention fixed on Katherine. This isn't open for discussion. You and Daniel need to be on that drive when it leaves. And you need to be on it too, Katherine insisted. Both of you. If those men are as dangerous as you say, staying here is foolhardy. A muscle twitched in Grady's jaw. I don't run from bullies, Katherine. It's not running, it's being smart, she countered. What happens to Jacob if something goes wrong? What happens to the ranch? The mention of his son gave Grady pause. He looked at Jacob, who was watching the adults with worried eyes. Pa, the boy said quietly, maybe Mrs. Blackwell is right. Miguel seized the opening. The ranch will still be here when we return, Jeef, and Judge Mercer can handle any legal matters in your absence. For a long moment, Grady stood silent, his internal struggle evident on his face. Finally, he nodded curtly. Pack only what you need, he told Jacob. We leave in an hour. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the ranch prepared for an unexpected departure. The cattle were already gathered in the southern pasture, ready for the drive that had been planned for later in the week. Now, ranch hands rushed to prepare the chuck wagon and gather necessary supplies, while Grady gave final instructions to the two hands who would stay behind to watch the ranch house. Katherine packed their few belongings with trembling hands, her mind racing. This hasty departure wasn't how she'd imagined leaving the ranch. There were things left unsaid between her and Grady, feelings unexplored, but perhaps that was for the best. Their time together had always been temporary, a brief respite before she and Daniel continued their journey. As she closed her small carpet bag, she heard a soft knock at the door. Jacob stood there, his young face solemn. Pa sent me to help you carry your things to the wagon, he said. He says we need to hurry. Katherine smiled at the boy who had become so dear to her in such a short time. Thank you, Jacob. We're ready. As they descended the stairs, Katherine carrying Daniel while Jacob managed their bags, she took a last look around the house that had briefly been their sanctuary. Whatever happened next, she would always remember this place and the kindness they had found here. Outside, the ranch yard was a hive of activity. Men on horseback called to each other as they made final preparations, while the chuck wagon stood ready, loaded with supplies. Grady was in the thick of it, giving orders and checking that everything was in place. When he saw Katherine and the boys emerge from the house, he made his way over to them, his expression unreadable. Miguel has prepared a space for you and Daniel in the chuck wagon, he told her. It won't be comfortable, but it's safer than riding horseback for the little one. Katherine nodded, trying to gauge his mood. Thank you for everything, Grady. His eyes softened slightly. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long journey ahead. Pa, Jacob interrupted, where will we ride? You'll be with me, son, Grady answered, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. Right where I can keep an eye on you. A commotion at the edge of the yard drew their attention. One of the ranch hands was pointing toward the horizon, where a dust cloud indicated approaching riders. Hawkins, Grady muttered, his face darkening, earlier than expected. He turned to Miguel, who had joined them. Get them moving now. Head southeast until nightfall, then turn west toward the old trail. We'll try to draw them off. Miguel nodded, shouting orders in rapid Spanish. The ranch hands responded immediately, driving the cattle into motion. Grady turned back to Katherine, his expression urgent. Go with Miguel, stay in the wagon and keep your head down. I'll catch up with you by nightfall. What are you going to do? Katherine asked, fear clutching at her heart. Buy you some time, Grady replied grimly. Jacob, help Mrs. Blackwell into the wagon, then come right back. You're riding with me. Grady, no, Katherine protested. It's too dangerous. His blue eyes met hers, and for a moment, all the things they hadn't said seemed to pass between them. "Trust me," he said simply. Before she could argue further, he was gone, striding toward the barn where several men were already mounting up. Jacob helped Katherine and Daniel into the chuck wagon, his young face set in determination. "Don't worry, Mrs. Blackwell. Pa knows what he's doing." As the boy ran back to join his father, Katherine settled Daniel beside her on the rough wooden seat. The wagon lurched into motion, joining the procession of cattle and cowboys already moving across the pasture. Looking back, she saw Grady and Jacob mounting their horses, along with 5 other men. They headed in the opposite direction, toward the approaching dust cloud. Katherine's heart clenched with fear for them both. "They'll be fine, Senora," Miguel assured her from his position driving the wagon. "Senor Blackburn is very capable, and those men with him are loyal and good with their guns." Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the distance between them and the ranch increased, she kept her eyes fixed on the receding figures of Grady and Jacob until they disappeared from view. The cattle drive moved steadily southeast, the experienced cowboys keeping the herd together despite the accelerated pace. Katherine tried to keep Daniel entertained in the jostling wagon, grateful for the canvas cover that provided some shade from the afternoon sun. Hours passed with no sign of Grady or the others. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Katherine's worry deepened. Miguel must have sensed her anxiety, for he spoke up as they navigated a shallow creek crossing. "Senor Blackburn is smart, Senora. He knows these lands better than anyone. If there was trouble, we would have heard gunshots." "Unless they were too far away," Katherine said softly, voicing the fear that had been growing all afternoon. Miguel shook his head confidently. "Sound carries far on the plains. No, I think they have led Hawkins on a chase away from us. They will rejoin us soon." Katherine wanted to believe him, but as twilight descended and they made camp in a protected valley, there was still no sign of Grady's group. The cowboys built small cooking fires and set up a watch rotation, their manner professional but alert. Daniel fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the day's excitement and motion. Katherine sat beside the chuck wagon, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill, her eyes scanning the darkening prairie. "You should rest, Senora," Miguel said, offering her a tin cup of coffee. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "I couldn't sleep," Katherine admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "Not until they're back." Miguel settled beside her, his weathered face thoughtful in the firelight. "You care for him, for Senor Blackburn?" It wasn't a question, but Katherine answered anyway. "Yes, more than I expected to." The foreman nodded, unsurprised. "He has been alone too long. Since the Senora died, he thinks only of the ranch and the boy, nothing for himself." "He's a good man," Katherine said, staring into her coffee. "The best I know," Miguel agreed, "but a man needs more than work and duty to be happy." He gave her a meaningful look. Sometimes it takes an unexpected person to remind him of this. Before Katherine could respond, a low whistle came from one of the sentries. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons, but a moment later came a familiar voice. "It's Blackburn. Don't shoot." Relief flooded through Katherine as she saw Grady riding into camp, Jacob beside him and the other men following close behind. They looked tired but unharmed, their horses showing signs of hard riding. Grady dismounted, lifting Jacob down after him despite the boy's protests that he could manage himself. He scanned the camp until his eyes found Katherine, and the tension in his shoulders visibly eased. "You made good time," he said to Miguel as they approached the fire. "Any trouble?" "None, Jeef," Miguel reported. "The herd is settled for the night. We will reach the western trail by tomorrow afternoon if we start at dawn." Grady nodded his approval, then turned to Katherine. "You and Daniel all right? We're fine," she assured him. "But what happened with Hawkins?" A grim smile touched Grady's lips. "We led them on a merry chase toward the north, making them think we were heading for the Canadian border. By the time they realize they've been tricked, we'll be well on our way to Denver." Jacob, despite his obvious fatigue, couldn't contain his excitement. Pa outfoxed them good, Mrs. Blackwell. We split up and left false trails and everything, like scouts in an Indian war. That's enough war stories for tonight, Grady said, tousling his son's hair affectionately. You need food and sleep in that order. As Jacob hurried off to get a plate from the chuck wagon, Grady sat heavily on a log beside Katherine. Now that he was closer, she could see the exhaustion etched in his face and the layer of trail dust covering his clothes. You took a terrible risk, she said quietly. He shrugged, accepting a cup of coffee from Miguel. Calculated risk. Hawkins is dangerous, but he's also predictable. And arrogant, makes him easy to fool if you know how. Still, you and Jacob could have been hurt because of me. Grady turned to face her, his blue eyes serious in the firelight. Katherine, stop, you didn't ask for any of this. Sometimes life deals a hard hand, and all we can do is play it as best we can. Their conversation was interrupted as Jacob returned with 2 plates of beans and salt pork. Cook says to eat while it's hot, Pa. They ate in companionable silence, the weariness of the day catching up with all of them. As they finished, Jacob's eyelids were drooping despite his efforts to stay awake. Off to bed with you, Grady told him gently. We've got another long day tomorrow. Jacob nodded sleepily, but before he left, he gave Katherine an impulsive hug. Night, Mrs. Blackwell. I'm glad you and Daniel are safe. The simple gesture brought tears to Katherine's eyes. Good night, Jacob. Thank you for being so brave today. After Jacob had gone to his bedroll near one of the small fires, Grady and Katherine sat in silence for a time, watching the flames dance in the darkness. He's become very attached to you, Grady observed finally. To both of you. Katherine nodded, feeling a pang at the thought of eventually saying goodbye to Jacob. Daniel adores him too. He's never had an older brother figure before. Grady turned the coffee cup in his hands, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Katherine, I've been thinking about what happens when we reach Denver. Her heart quickened at his serious tone. Yes, George Wilkes is a good man. He'll give you a fair start, a safe place for you and Daniel. Grady paused, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. But there are other options you might consider. Katherine held her breath, afraid to hope. What options? Grady set his cup aside, turning to face her fully. You could come back with us, to the ranch. He spoke carefully, as if navigating uncertain ground. Jacob needs proper schooling, more than I can give him. And the ranch hands children too. We could build a proper schoolhouse. You'd be doing what you love. Katherine's pulse quickened. Are you offering me a position as a teacher? I'm offering you a home, Grady said, his voice dropping lower. For you and Daniel, if you want it. The weight of his words hung in the night air between them. Katherine searched his face, trying to understand exactly what he was proposing. Grady, she began cautiously, are you saying this because you feel responsible for us? Because if that's the case, no, he interrupted, reaching for her hand. That's not why. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. The truth is, Katherine, these past 2 weeks have shown me something I didn't expect to find again. When Mary died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had Jacob, the ranch, it seemed enough, but it wasn't. I just didn't know how incomplete it all felt until you came along. Katherine's heart hammered in her chest as his fingers tightened gently around hers. I'm not good with words, Grady continued, frustration evident in his tone. What I'm trying to say is that I care for you, Katherine, more than I thought possible in such a short time. And the thought of you and Daniel continuing on to Denver without us. He shook his head. I don't like it. I care for you too, Katherine admitted softly, both of you. But Grady, my situation is complicated. The railroad, Hawkins, and his kind respect strength and influence, Grady said firmly. Once they realize you're under my protection permanently, they'll move on. The Kansas Pacific doesn't want a prolonged fight with established ranchers bad for business. You sound very sure, Katherine observed. I am, Grady replied, but more importantly, I'm sure about what I want. His blue eyes held her steadily in the firelight. The question is, what do you want, Catherine? The directness of his question took her breath away. What did she want? Safety for Daniel, certainly. A home, a purpose, a chance to use her skills as a teacher again. But beyond that, in the quiet corners of her heart that she'd kept carefully guarded since her husband's death, she wanted companionship, understanding, love. And somehow, against all odds and expectations, she'd begun to find all of those things with this quiet, steadfast man and his son. I want to stop running, she said finally. I want Daniel to have a stable home, a chance at a normal childhood. She looked up at Grady, allowing herself to be fully honest. And I want to see where this journey with you might lead. The smile that transformed Grady's face made him look years younger. Then come home with us. We'll face whatever comes together. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. His beard was rough against her skin, but his lips were unexpectedly soft. When they finally parted, Catherine felt breathless, as if she'd been running. I should check on Daniel, she murmured, suddenly shy. Grady nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. We have a long ride ahead tomorrow, should get some rest. As Catherine rose to go, he caught her hand once more. Catherine, she turned back, heart still fluttering from their kiss. Yes. Thank you, he said simply, for giving us a chance. She smiled, squeezing his hand. Thank you for finding us when you did, for saving us from those wolves. Seems to me we saved each other, Grady replied softly. As Catherine made her way to the wagon where Daniel slept peacefully, she reflected on the truth of Grady's words. He had indeed saved them from wolves, both the four-legged kind and the two-legged variety that had been pursuing them. But she had perhaps saved him too, in a different way, from the loneliness that had been his constant companion since his wife's death. The journey to Denver took 5 days, moving at the pace of the cattle herd. By the second day, it was clear that Hawkins and his men had lost their trail, and the tension that had hung over the group began to ease. Grady rode mostly with the herd during the days, but in the evenings, he, Catherine, and the boys would share meals together, gradually settling into the rhythms of a family. Daniel had taken to calling Jacob my big brother, much to the older boy's evident delight. And Catherine found herself growing more certain with each passing day that her decision to return to the ranch with Grady was the right one. When they reached the outskirts of Denver, Grady rode ahead with Catherine to meet with George Wilkes, explaining their change of plans. The older rancher, a contemporary of Grady's father from Kentucky, was understanding and supportive. Blackburn Ranch is getting quite the reputation for fine beef cattle, Wilkes remarked as they prepared to leave. But I'd say its owner is showing even better judgment in matters of the heart. Grady actually blushed at that, mumbling something about having to check on the herd, which made Catherine and Wilkes exchange amused glances. The cattle sale went well, bringing a price that exceeded Grady's expectations. After settling accounts and purchasing supplies for the ranch that couldn't be obtained in Dodge City, they began the journey home. Without the cattle to slow them down, they made good time, covering ground much faster than on the outward journey. As they crested the final ridge that overlooked Blackburn Ranch, Catherine felt a surge of emotion. The sprawling ranch house, the barns and corrals, the cottonwoods along the creek, it all looked like a painting of the perfect homestead. And now it was to be her home too. What do you think? Grady asked, bringing his horse alongside hers. Still sure about your decision? Catherine looked at him, at the hope and vulnerability in his blue eyes, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. More sure than I've ever been about anything, she replied. His answering smile was all the confirmation she needed. That evening, after the boys were asleep and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Grady and Catherine sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Kansas sky. I've been thinking, Grady said, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. We should build the schoolhouse near the main house. That way you won't have far to go in winter, and the children from the outlying homesteads can get here more easily. Katherine leaned against him, enjoying the solid warmth of his presence. That sounds perfect. How many students do you think we might have? To start, maybe a dozen, counting Jacob and Daniel, but folks around here have been wanting a proper school for years. Once word spreads, I wouldn't be surprised if we had 20 or more by Christmas. 20 students, Katherine mused, imagining the busy, happy classroom. We'll need books, slates, maps. Whatever you need, Grady assured her. I want this to be the finest school in the county. Katherine turned to look at him, touched by his enthusiasm for her dream. You're a remarkable man, Grady Blackburn. He shook his head slightly. Just a man who recognizes a good thing when he finds it. His expression grew more serious. Katherine, there's something I want to ask you. Her pulse quickened at his tone. Yes, Grady took her hand in his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. I know it hasn't been long, and I'd understand if you want to wait. But I've learned that life can change in an instant, and when you know something is right, you shouldn't hesitate. He slipped from the swing to one knee before her, still holding her hand. Katherine Blackwell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of making this house truly a home again? Of letting me be a father to Daniel, as you've already become a mother to Jacob. Tears blurred Katherine's vision as she looked at this man, who had risked everything for her and Daniel, who had opened his heart and his home to them without reservation. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly, yes, Grady, I would be honored to be your wife. His face lit with joy as he rose to embrace her, lifting her from the swing and spinning her in a circle that left them both laughing. When he set her down, his kiss was tender and full of promise. We'll have a good life together, he murmured against her hair, all four of us. We already do, Katherine replied, her heart overflowing with happiness. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Judge Mercer officiating and the ranch hands and neighboring families in attendance. Katherine wore a blue dress that Grady had ordered specially from Dodge City, and Daniel and Jacob stood proudly beside them as they spoke their vows. In the years that followed, the Blackburn Ranch prospered and grew. The schoolhouse was built as promised, and Katherine found deep satisfaction in teaching the children of the area. The railroad men eventually stopped looking for Theodore Blackwell, their attention drawn to newer, more profitable pursuits. 2 years after their marriage, Katherine gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Rose, who quickly became the delight of their older brothers and father. The family was complete, bound together by love and the shared experiences that had brought them to each other. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Grady and Katherine would sit on the porch swing, just as they had that night he proposed, and marvel at the journey that had brought them together. Do you ever think about how different things might have been? Katherine would ask, nestled against his shoulder. If you hadn't come along when you did that day, I try not to, Grady would answer, his arm tightening around her. But I know one thing for certain, finding you and Daniel was the greatest blessing of my life. And Katherine, thinking of the desperate woman she had been, fighting off wolves to protect her son, would silently agree. For in saving her from those predators, Grady Blackburn had also saved her from a life of running and fear. And in return, she had given him the one thing his success and prosperity couldn't provide, a love that had conquered the loneliness they had both been fighting in their own ways. Under the vast Kansas sky, the Blackburn family had found not just a home, but a sanctuary built on courage, kindness, and the unshakable foundation of a love that had begun in the most unexpected of circumstances.